Eugene Newman seeks to find what it is that really communicates in a painting.
One of the problems for contemporary painting is that it leaves the people behind in some way because they don't know where to get a hold of it, what is going on here. And there's been an effort to see if there's some kind of new language. The old language is gone. The question is there some sort of modern vocabulary that comes from some internal source? Even though I couldn't pursue it as a kind of identity, I did sort of claim painting somehow or other. When I started, I was still identifying myself as a guy who came from the tropics because I had come from South America, and that was what my visual world was, in a way. At that time, I probably thought that some kind of extravagant expression was the deal, that's what painting allowed you to do. I kind of was very itinerant at that time. Part of the time I was in Mexico, and there I was able to paint and hang out with painters. And Mexico was kind of in the middle of its great art period. And in any case, I painted there and met people, and they, oddly enough, took me, it didn't take much, but they accepted that that's what I did. Little by little, I wound up in New York in the late 50s, early 60s, living, a kind of picturesque, ratty, bohemian life. And the stuff was going on all around me. I mean, everything was happening. The abstract expressionists had their studios in the same neighborhood. I was exposed to it, but I kind of didn't have a mentor or some grounding. I was just sort of finding my way, and most of it was still kind of autobiographical in some way or another. It began to change later when I moved to California and I became more interested in formal things. And the paintings I admired were the kind of paintings that had some kind of big structure. So it was little by little, and I've never resolved that. Actually, I mean, in my painting, the sort of vagrancies from figuration to abstraction. I mean, ultimately, I decided that was a phony argument. And it's true that in the 60s and 70s, you were almost asked to take sides on the issue of figuration or abstraction. It was a mark of your particular kind of courage. Which kind of courage do you have in some way or another? And I finally came to the conclusion there was something wrong with that. The claim of abstractionists was okay. They claimed that there was another way that images read other than just sort of referring you to some narrative or, and that was important. I agree with that. But limiting things to sort of the refusal to represent anything seemed kind of not necessary to me. The way the Constellations paintings came about is there was a program to do public works for the state of New Mexico at that time. It was part of the tail end of the anti-poverty program. And you had to give them a proposal of some sort, and most of them had something to do, were actually asked to have something to do with a New Mexican identity. And I just didn't have the sort of the passion for the landscape or for the sort of magical voodoo of New Mexico. But what I did have is I lived way at the end of Cerro Gordo in an old house that was up there that my wife and I had rented. And the nighttime sky was something extraordinary. So I got involved with that, and I proposed that if I did get a grant, that I would do images based on the nighttime sky. It started really because it was the only thing I could offer about my environment in New Mexico that I could relate to in any kind of intense way, and that's what I started doing those. The link between that and maybe some contemporary notions of art making and abstraction is that the sky is really a random scattering of points, and yet there's this irresistible impulse to find a familiar image in it. I think at the foundation of all of abstraction as the 20th century comes is the idea that you can look at paintings done in the 15th and 16th, 17th century and not have any emotional empathy with the subject. In other words, you don't relate to the nativity or as part of the Christian world and all that. And yet you respond to these paintings. So what are you responding to if you don't have that kind of emotional connection to the subject? And so the idea is that there is some other kind of thing going on in a painting that is not the narrative, that something else is going on that makes people jump to it and relate to it. What it is a real mystery, and I'm not sure I understand it. But among artists, people have searched for that thing, to connect to that thing that is not the narrative. The multitude of options when you look at anything is just enormous. The first hit at a subject was great as a kind of spontaneous thing, as an expression of exuberance. There are certain themes that go through a lot of stuff, and one of the things that is characteristic of my work is that almost invariably, one way or another, it refers to a body or bodies of some sort. I can explain how I do this. That explanation is not a claim on behalf of the thing. It won't hold up in a court of law. And the painting, once I do it, is to be judged by the viewer. I can't control that judgment in any way. I mean, the artist is also a part of his community. And of course, the artist has a vocabulary and sentiments that are not totally alien from the world around him. But he can't guarantee that the person who's looking at it has a frame of reference. So in some ways, it's kind of unfortunate that a lot of artwork is the language of a subculture. Stanley Cavell, he's a philosopher of art, and he said in a book in the 80s about the situation of art. He said, when you have an opening in New York, it's like a great show trial. He said, you don't know whether it's the work that's on trial or the audience. In other words, it's become a kind of difficult situation to understand who is doing what's required. Is the audience not doing what's required, or are the artists failing? It's not clear.